Hello there, everyone. We're going to think about how our food budgets have changed over the years and what our food budgets look like compared to other countries. We're going to look at convenience foods and how simplicity can help us with our food budgets to be able to eat real good whole foods the way God intended for our food to be, just keeping our meal plans simple. And we'll talk more about planning next week, but and I want to hear your ideas for how do you keep your meals simple? What does simple look like to you? So let's dive in to those statistics. The article is from 2014 and it's looking at the cost, the real cost of real food. And it goes through raising chickens and eggs. That's been a big deal lately as we've watched the cost of eggs go up recently. They have this comparison, a couple of different comparisons. First, we're looking at the percentage of overall budget that we have for food, our food budget from 1970. And really, I think in 1970, the industrialization of our food supply was already pretty well underway, but still, that's a lot of decades ago. And what people would spend anywhere from 17 to 22% of your overall budget they were spending on food. And as of 2010, that had shrunk to just 7 or 8%, really spending less on the food that we're buying. And in addition to that, let's see, I thought I had seen, no, let me look. Something comparing the cost of health. No, that's not in this article. That must have been somewhere else. So I thought that was really interesting. That's here. That's looking at the United States and how we shrunk how much of our budgets we're spending on food, which means there's been a lot of other things and different that we're spending money on other things more than we're spending money on food. So only 7 to 8%. Have you ever done that? I have not figured up what percentage of our budget here in the Wood household is spent on food. Have you ever done that? If you have, drop that down in the comments. What percentage of your budget do you spend on food? And what's your thoughts on how that's changed since 1970? And I wonder if there might have already been a downward trend and if that would have been even a larger percentage if we went back further in history. Very, very curious to know that. So alongside of that, we've also seen the industrialization of our food. And I have highlighted here a quote from the article because we've really scaled, right? We look at like chickens. A small farm is maybe going to have 100 or so chickens, maybe more. And especially the chickens that we want to get our eggs from, the chickens that we want to eat, I think we would have a preference for them living happy chicken lives, right? So chickens were designed as part of God's creation to be outside and they scratch and they peck and they eat they have a pretty varied diet, right? They eat a lot of different things from grains and veggies to bugs, and I think chickens will eat just from the I was a city girl. I haven't been around chickens all that much, but I follow some homesteaders and I have some friends with chickens, and so I've heard comments on how chickens will eat just about anything. And now we have these broad, like humongous chicken houses with like thousands of chickens and they're all crowded in there. I call them chicken slums. And we've done the same thing with cows and we've done the same thing with pigs. It seems like lamb, they haven't quite done that with lamb. We've really gone large scale and producing a lot of food at once, humongous quantities of food. So here's the quote. It's easy to think that economies of scale can reduce costs, but they tend to result in inferior food and less humane treatment of the animals. And I think as Christians, personally, my opinion is that part of our stewardship is knowing that the where we're getting our food from, that was also under good stewardship. And it is my opinion that those chicken slums and cow slums and pig slums and things like that is not good stewardship. And I would highly recommend, there's a book, I have it behind me here, called The Marvelous Pigness of Pigs, written by Joel Salatin. And that was written to his fellow Christians, because Joel Salatin is a Christian, talking about, and he goes into a lot of detail about the ramifications of these large-scale operations, specifically with animals, but even the large-scale monocrop way we grow vegetables and the consequences that come from that, and how it's not good stewardship, and it's also not being a good neighbor. We used to drive by a feedlot dairy farm when we lived in El Paso, and we would go visit my dad in New Mexico, and we would need to remember to put the air conditioning on recycle so that we're not bringing the air in from outside as we drove by that because of the smell. So that's not being a good neighbor in a lot of different ways. So I highly recommend that book. So I wanted to bring that as we're considering how simplicity can help us with our food budgets to be able to eat real whole foods and try to stay in the budget. To consider what percentage of the budget, of your budget, is spent on food. Think about how we can be better stewards in the food that we are choosing. And that's a soapbox that I can get on, but I'm going to resist the temptation to step up on that soapbox right now. So I have one more comparison here. This was done in 2011. Food as a percentage of total household budget by country. We're looking at, it's like a bar graph. We have the US, Canada, Germany, Japan, Brazil, India, China, Egypt, and Pakistan. And as we go down that list, the bar gets longer. So US and Canada are pretty close, although Canada is, they're both less than 10%. What did I say? 7 or 8% for the US. So I would say maybe 8 or 9% for Canada. Germany goes above 10%. So maybe that's maybe 11. Then Japan, maybe 15%. Brazil, we're looking at maybe 25%. And India, we're over 30% with India, maybe 31, 32%. China is 35%. Egypt is approaching 40%, maybe 38, 39. And then Pakistan is 45%. Almost half of their overall budget is spent on food. So I found that very, very interesting. And yet in the US, we hear, and even before the economy got wonky, and the economy has not just been wonky since January, just need to say that. It's been wonky for at least a couple of years with prices going up, maybe longer, gradually, but it just became a lot more noticeable probably since January for a lot of reasons. And okay, so I just found that really, really interesting. So just things to consider as we look at keeping our food simple. So let's look at convenience food, because really one of the main things, that's like I talked about in the last video, that the ultra processed foods are something that's part of our industrial food system. And I did a free webinar on the ingredients that we want to be on the lookout for and try to avoid foods with these ingredients that are having negative impacts on our health, even though we don't realize it. Maybe we haven't made the connections that. And a lot of times I think we're relying on these convenience foods because our lives are so super busy. And that comes back to our priorities again there. And maybe as Christians, we can pray about our priorities from time to time and really listen for whether the Holy Spirit may want us to adjust those. So I have a definition of convenience foods here from the USDA. Convenience foods are defined as types of foods that save time in food acquisition, preparation, and cleanup. Convenience foods are restaurant meals, especially when we're super busy. And back when we had our kiddo in sports, I was guilty of this. We would rely more often than I care to admit on running and grabbing some fast food because of all of the practice schedule and all of that. So restaurant meals, ready-to-eat food from grocery stores. The ready-to-eat food encompasses many types of food ranging from bananas, they're not bad, that would be a real whole food, to frozen pizza that require little to no preparation. Although these convenience foods save time, they tend to have lower nutritional values and can be more expensive than food that takes more time to prepare. We're working on staying in the budget, but also maximizing our nutrition in the food that we're getting. But there's like two different things to budget there, isn't there? There's the budget of our finances and the budget of our time. So, and both of those can be challenging. The time may be more challenging. And we'll talk more about that next week when we look at kind of meal planning and preparing ahead and things like that. But the best way to cut costs while eating real food is to give up, let go of some of those convenience foods. So, how can we try to simplify where we're still getting good, nourishing foods without overspending? One way is to just make simple meals, okay? Things like a roasted chicken, sheet pan meals. Earlier this week, I made a sheet pan meal with some chicken thighs, some carrots and potatoes, and then we serve some sauerkraut. We keep sauerkraut on hand and try to have some of that alongside many of our meals. Another simple meal that I prepare often is a good clean sausage, which means you got to read those ingredients, with sauteed red or green cabbage. I've got a really wonderful recipe that you can make two different ways, either in the oven or on the stovetop for the red cabbage. Simple. It does not have to be complicated or elaborate. I'm not saying we should never have those, but it just shouldn't be part of our regular daily meals. And really, I think if we're keeping it simple, it's going to make it easier to plan and prep ahead and have things ready to go so that we can eat good, nourishing foods in the midst of our busy lifestyles. I mentioned cabbage. So another thing, and the Dirty Dozen, the EWG Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 list, that is one way as far as buying vegetables and fruits and things like fresh produce, or even the frozen produce. You want to keep that in mind, which ones maybe you should get organic instead of the conventional or non-organic because of the pesticide residue. Those are very helpful tools, but there's also, we can look at the season, okay? So vegetables and fruits are going to vary, like getting some apples when it's apple season as opposed to getting some mango that came from Mexico. The prices for a piece of fruit is going to vary. It's going to be a big gap there. If we're focusing on veggies that are in season, that can help reduce that cost a little bit. And then if you're, as you're looking at those veggies that are in season, they're going to be less expensive than things that are not in season, which means they're going to travel for a further distance from someplace where they are in season, right? Like getting those mangoes from somewhere else. We can look at the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 to help us prioritize. You can even look at the whole list and decide, I'm going to go down to 15, the top 15, and make sure I get those organic or whatever, whatever works for you. So prioritize getting those organic and maybe get the rest not organic if there's a big price difference where you're shopping. In the winter, you can use more frozen veggies, because those are picked and frozen. They're harvested and frozen at the peak of their ripeness and freshness. And they will be less expensive. They're going to be fresher than produce that has been shipped from halfway around the world, for sure. So that is one way to save money and still bring in plenty of vegetables into your diet, even in the winter. And then vegetables like cabbage. I mentioned cabbage as one of my go-tos. At least once a week I make something with cabbage in it. Sweet potatoes, those tend to be inexpensive year-round. Maybe potatoes if your family does regular potatoes. And they can be great fillers and substitutes in recipes. Some other really good fillers, if your family eats beans, adding beans into a recipe. And then things like rice, if your family does rice. There's a lot of different ways to stretch this out and keep meals simple. Cabbage can be made into sauerkraut as well for later use. So things like that. If you get cabbage, you can get beets, a lot of vegetables that you can get while they're in season, and then learn how to put them into a ferment. When you do a ferment, that up levels the nutrition and it will preserve it longer, so you'll have it on hand for a longer period of time than just keeping it fresh. Also, stretching those meats. We know getting the meats from happy cows, happy chickens, happy pigs that were raised to they were raised up in the way they were designed to live. The grass-fed meat, good quality ocean-caught seafood, it is more expensive. I often make the joke that I would come and say, I would like my food without the pesticides, please. And then they would come back with me, okay, we charge extra for that. So it's rather frustrating the way the world is right now. But so it is more expensive to get those meats. Pray, seek where God would have you go with that. Do the best you can. Get the best that you can. I would say even getting some conventional meat, if that's all you can afford, into your diet is going to be better than none at all. But how can we stretch them? Stews, curries, stir fry with rice, if your family does rice. I just made a stir fry yesterday I had about a pound of stew meat and put that together with lots of veggies, and I used some rice cauliflower in that. But then I also did make some rice. My husband ate it with the rice, and I ate it without the rice because I am in a healing mode right now, so not eating the rice. It was a way to stretch that stew meat so that it could have more servings in the meal. Yeah, so soups and stews are great even in the summer because then you get the good broths that come with that, super nourishing. And you want to try to get some meat on the bones and then use those both like a whole chicken or something like that. Use those bones and any leftover veggie scraps to make your bone broth, meat stock. That's going to also really be good and nourishing for your whole body, but especially your gut. So that is another way to stretch. And you can make a whole chicken. If you have a very large family, you might need to make a couple of chickens that you can serve for that one meal. Like I have a whole chicken in the crock pot right now. My husband and I will each eat the leg quarters off of that, and then the remaining meat will go into something else. So that one chicken will make 2 or 3 meals for us. So just different things like that you can really think and get creative, think outside the box, and stretch by adding those beans or lentils or things in, and thinking about how you can make a larger meat like a whole chicken or something like that, and then stretch it across multiple meals. So lots of different ways to simplify and do a little stretching with the meats especially. So I would love to hear from you. What does it look like to stretch? What does it look like to simplify? Do you feel like you need to do some adjusting in your budget for better prioritizing your good nutrition for yourself and your family? So I would love to hear your thoughts on those statistics and how our food has changed, how our budgets have changed, our priorities have changed, haven't they? That just shows how our priorities have shifted over these last bunch of decades. Yeah. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. Have a great rest of the day, and I look forward to hearing from you guys.